Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 50 Movies number 6. And this video is a part of a series of videos where I count down my top 50 favorite movies of my lifetime. For my top 10 favorite movies, I'm doing a full review for each film in my top 10. This video is for my number 6 favorite film. And number 6 is Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. I personally consider the Lord of the Rings trilogy to be the best film trilogy in existence, and although it's blasphemy to say, I'd even go as far to say that the films were an improvement on the books. The Lord of the Rings books are the most classic fantasy novel series in existence that surely inspired a whole genre of books trying to recapture the magic the series managed to have. For the longest time, this book series was considered completely unfilmable. In the 70s, they attempted to make a cartoon movie of the Lord of the Rings, splitting it into 2 movies, but the second film was never made because the first was considered a failure, and indeed the movie was a mess and didn't really work. So, it was so impressive that Peter Jackson's film trilogy managed so successfully to transfer the great story to the big screen. There were a multiple of reasons on why this worked so well. For one, they made it into 3 movies, as indeed it was based off of 3 books, so it gave them the time that they needed to do the story justice. And for another thing, the creators were obviously doing it for the love of story and not just a way to make a buck. In fact, the budget it had was relatively small for a big blockbuster trilogy of its size. Everyone from the writers, actors, set designers, wardrobe design, the many special effects artists that gave every little piece of detail to stay true to the extensive world that J.R.R. Tolkien created. They even hired renowned Lord of the Rings artists to do work on set design and conceptual art. Peter Jackson has a certain style of filmmaking, particularly here, that goes against the conventional Hollywood mindset of always making everything really concise and simple and shortening everything, use as little dialogue as possible, and make the scenes as short as possible. And personally, I'm very against this typical mindset as well. Sometimes it works, but it's not the word of God. Sometimes it's worth it to take these conventions and throw them in the garbage. And one of those times in particular was when telling such an intricate and well-developed story, because the films go into such detail of the world and the characters and their motivation. It makes you feel like you're part of the world, and that's very important for a film version of The Lord of the Rings. And the reason why I went as far to say that the films are better than the books, which many I'm sure would consider an outrageous statement, is because the books are written almost like a history book, as Tolkien was more fascinated with history, mythology, and language than he was with creating fully developed characters. The film added such richly developed characters and really added emotion and heart to the story. I felt it breathed much more life into this already rich story, and that made me engulfed in the story the way the books never really did. It also richly respected the source material, staying true to what made the story great. That being said, there were certain aspects that weren't adapted perfectly. It didn't make mistakes from time to time, but overall I found it was a vast improvement. As for why I specifically chose Return of the King for my number 6 favorite film as opposed to the other Lord of the Rings movies, it's because I feel it is the best of the trilogy. It has the most epic and spanning story with the most powerfully emotional moments, and overall comprehensive film that the other films were lacking. I still love the other 2 films. The Fellowship of the Ring was my number 13, and The Two Towers was my number 22 favorite movies. However, The Fellowship of the Ring was a more simplistic story of a group of characters journeying from one place to another and encountering trouble along the way. And The Two Towers got too bogged down and the underdog facing an impossible battle and dragged it out for far too long. The Return of the King, however, told a complex and an intricate story that all came together in one epic ending. We saw the kingdoms of Gondor, Rohan fighting for survival against impossible odds, and the members of their respective royal families coming to grips with the loss and change, and the story of Aragorn facing his true destiny in becoming king and fighting for those he loves, and seeing the hobbits grow and become much bigger than what anyone would have expected them to, as Merry and Pippin become respected members of massive military forces, and Frodo and Sam rise up to the impossible task of destroying the ring and defeating evil. The most common complaint I've heard about The Return of the King is that it's too long, and personally I think that's more of a problem for the first two films, particularly The Two Towers. And those films weren't paced properly, and they left far too much material for the last film. Originally, the plan was to begin The Return of the King at a scene where Aragorn and Éowyn are resting in Edoras, and Éowyn awakes from a dream. This is also shortly before Pippin takes the Palantir from Gandalf and has his vision of Saruman. Currently in the film, this happens about half hour through the film. So if they started it here, it would have gone a great length to cutting down the running time of this film. A problem I think came into it is when they were editing The Two Towers, they decided to do what was best for that film instead of what was best for the trilogy as a whole. And in my opinion, they ended that film way too soon. Even when I first saw The Two Towers in theaters before I actually read the books, I thought it ended too soon, and I really wanted to see the confrontation with Saruman, as I thought this was a vital storyline to resolve in that film. But it was left out and saved for The Return of the King, but because of running time of that film, it was so long, it was ultimately cut from the theatrical release and saved for the extended version. Peter Jackson said it felt like they were dealing with old business, and I totally agree, which is why that scene should have been at the end of The Two Towers instead. I heard the arguments that having this scene with Saruman at Isengard and several other scenes that were at the start of Return of the King at the end of The Two Towers instead would feel really anticlimactic, as the ending of The Two Towers right after the battle was the most exciting place to end that film. And overall, I agree with this sentiment. However, that's what I mean by they edited The Two Towers to suit that film and not the trilogy as a whole. Yes, it would have been anticlimactic, but it belonged more in that film, as it was dealing with those storylines more relevant to that film, and it wouldn't have left far too much footage for The Return of the King, which caused the film to be far too long, and many vital and important scenes had to be cut from the theatrical release because of this. And The Two Towers runtime could have easily been cut down to make room for these end scenes, as the build-up to the Battle of Helm's Deep was far too long and drawn out. A lot of these build-up to the battles could have easily been withheld for the extended version in order to make a much more concise and succinct theatrical release. However, I don't agree with the complaints about Shelob's Lair, which was originally in the Two Towers book. But there's no way they could have included it in the Two Towers film. The pacing of everything changed drastically due to the adaptation, and this was just a natural part of that. The Shelob scene doesn't even happen until halfway through The Return of the King, the movie. Had they put it in the Two Towers, Frodo and Sam would have virtually no material left for The Return of the King. Peter Jackson even points out that even Tolkien said the events of Shelob's Lair were occurring concurrently with the Battle of Minas Tirith, so it made much more sense the way they did it. But because so much was left for the last film, I much preferred the extended version of The Return of the King to the theatrical release, as I felt the theatrical release left out far too many important and vital scenes. So whenever I rewatch the movie, I always watch the extended version, which I feel is far superior to the theatrical release. We get scenes like the confrontation with Saruman that I mentioned, seeing Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas confront the Corsairs, proving that they won the allegiance of the army of the dead, seeing the House of Healing where Éomer and Aragorn stay by Éowyn's side as she recovers, and where Faramir and Éowyn meet, and seeing beloved moments from the book such as Frodo and Sam disguising themselves as orcs, and the mouth of Sauron treating with Aragorn. All these were amazing scenes that totally enriched this already great film. However, I will note I'm not a huge fan of the Frodo and Sam scenes in the first half of this film. For me, the Frodo and Sam stuff was my favorite stuff from the Two Towers, but in the first half of The Return of the King, I found it to be mostly filler and just a rehash of what we've already seen in the Two Towers. Particularly the Gollum scenes, which were written and filmed before the Gollum scenes of the Two Towers. So the filmmakers were more attached to the Gollum scenes in The Return of the King. However, as an audience member, we were introduced to Gollum scenes first in the Two Towers, and the Return of the King's one were just seemed like a rehashing of ground that was already covered and therefore not as good. And although I'm no book purist, I also didn't feel the scene where Frodo sent Sam away was particularly necessary, and I thought it would have been better had they stuck more closely to the books and kept Sam there for Shelob's lair. However, I don't use this as an example to say the film sucks or bad adaptation, as some say. I think that's ridiculous. It's just one scene, but I do feel it would have been better had they stuck closely to the books in this particular case. However, I do love all the Frodo and Sam stuff once they got to Shelob's lair and all the stuff after that. From then on out, all their material was simply amazing and told a very powerful and touching story. I also want to talk about the battle scenes, which I heard some complain were far too violent and far too long and drawn out, but I totally disagree. In fact, I felt that way about the battle scenes in Two Towers, that they were too long and drawn out, and a lot of it was unnecessary, but I found the battle scenes in Return of the King to be very exciting and meaningful. I felt all the battle scenes here served a very specific purpose and were vital to cranking up the tension of the overall film, and I felt made the film even more amazing, which added to why I felt this was the best film of the trilogy. Okay, although I feel this may not be necessary, but just to be consistent with the rest of my reviews, I'm going to do a spoiler section of this film. So if for some odd reason you haven't seen Return of the King, or you don't already know the ending and don't want to be spoiled, you should turn off this video now, and thanks a lot for watching. However, for those of you who have seen it, and which I would imagine would be most of you, please continue forewarned as I go into spoiler territory. And the first thing I want to address is the so-called multiple endings. I mentioned this in several other videos I did, but I'm so annoyed at the fact that so many people complain that this film's ending was too long or that it had multiple endings. I personally think that's complete horse crap. All of this film's so-called multiple endings were absolutely vital to the film, and it would have been an absolute travesty had they left out any of them. Although I do think there are a few caveats to this, which I'll get into as I explore the endings. So first off, Frodo throws the ring in the fire, and Frodo and Sam run from the mountain that is exploding. Some feel they should have ended the movie here or considered this the first ending. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. These people are fucking stupid. I'm sorry, but there's no other way of saying this. I can't tell you how outraged I would have been had they ended this movie here. I would have been likely to go on a murderous rage. And then, after that, Gandalf arrives riding eagles, and they pick up Frodo and Sam and take them to safety, and some people consider this the next ending and say it should have ended here. My response to this is pretty much the same as it was before. So next, Frodo wakes up in bed and is reunited with the Fellowship, and they have a heartfelt reunion, and this scene again was completely vital to the film, and so some think it should have ended here, which I also think is ridiculous. This film is called The Return of the King. You can't end the film without actually seeing the king crowned. That's ludicrous. So next we see the coronation scene, which some see as the most touching scene of the film, where Aragorn and all the kings and queens and noble warriors bowed to the four lowly hobbits, and thus some think it would have been the perfect scene to end the film on. But I totally disagree. We need to see the hobbits return to the Shire in order to get a full sense of closure, since that's where the whole trilogy began. I mean, you can't end the trilogy without seeing the Shire again. That would be a travesty. So next we see the hobbits return to the Shire, where no one really cares about all the adventures they went on, and they go to a pub and are drinking when Sam decides to hit on Rosie, and the next thing we see, he's getting married to her. So here I will give a little bit of leeway and say perhaps the scene could have been cut out of the theatrical release and left for the extended version. Although I could see them doing that. I'm glad they left it in, because you need to see Sam marry Rosie. Because this was a setup in the very first film, you needed some resolution to that. However, even if they had left the scene out, it shouldn't have ended here, because you do need the next set of scenes, which were Frodo writing his book and telling Sam how out of place he feels, and then him and Bilbo traveling to the Grey Havens to travel into the West. And this scene you absolutely need. This showed the great toll the journey took on Frodo, and how it led him to going with the last of the elves and Gandalf to leave Middle-earth. However, this is where I'm going to agree that this film should have ended here, because the next scene we get is of Sam returning home to his family with a voiceover from Frodo. Okay, this could have been cut from the theatrical release and left for the extended version. It wasn't really that necessary, and the ending was long already, so this could have been saved for the extended version. But I absolutely, steadfastly stand by that this film could not have ended any earlier than the scene with Frodo leaving the Grey Havens. Has ended the scene any earlier than that, it would have been a total and complete outrage. In fact, apparently, there were other scenes filmed that showed what happened to other characters such as Legolas and Gimli, and these weren't even included in the extended version. Personally, I would have liked to see them in the theatrical release, but they should have at the very least been in the extended version. And what's funny is, some book purists complained that the scarring of the Shire was left out. So, they would have wanted the ending to be even longer than it was, because if you read the Return of the King, the book of the Return of the King, you notice that when Frodo throws the ring into the fire, it's only like halfway through the book. There's still hundreds of pages left. And a lot of that is the scarring of the Shire, which I totally agree with the filmmaker's decision to leave it out, as it would have been totally anticlimactic. In case you don't know what the scarring of the Shire refers to, it refers to the section of the book where, when the hobbits return to the Shire, they find it destroyed and in a state of war, where Saruman and Wormtongue took over. And eventually they have to kill them. Much like what has transferred in that scene in the film at Isengard, Wormtongue stabs Saruman in the back, and then an archer kills Wormtongue. I think it made total sense for the film to do it this way. It worked so much better. When I took the tour at Hobbiton, which was filmed in Matamata, New Zealand, the tour guide said that they had originally filmed the scarring of the Shire, but then decided to cut it out. But that's actually incorrect. What they filmed was visions of the Shire being overrun by orcs that was shown in Frodo's vision that Galadriel gave him in the first film. They never for one second intended to do the scarring of the Shire in the film. It's kind of sad when you know more about a subject than the tour guide does. At any rate, The Return of the King was overall an amazing film, the best example of an epic fantasy adventure in existence, and jam-packed with tense and emotional scenes like the Battle of Minas Tirith, seeing Aragorn confront Sauron's armies at the Black Gate, seeing Frodo almost killed by Shelob, and then Sam helping him recover from that, to the awesomely tense scene with Frodo and Gollum's struggle where the ring is finally destroyed, which was absolutely perfect. And then the awesome endings that were not too long, god damn it, making this my 6th all-time favorite movie. So that's it for my top 50 movies, number 6. I'll put links in the description below for all the other videos in my top 50 movie series, and make sure you subscribe to keep up with the future videos I'll be doing in my top 50 series. And thanks a lot for watching.